are joining us on Zoom, welcome our Monica Cesada, who is working our camera, and Kent Martin, who is hosting our Zoom. If you are joining us on Zoom, you have access to closed captioning. If that is helpful for you, if you're joining us here in the meeting house, we have hearing-assisted devices, if that is helpful for you. We welcome children to remain in the sanctuary for worship with quiet play with Kim in the back. And frankly, it is here for anyone who wants to move around, maybe move to the back. I continue to marvel at our aversion to the front row. I think maybe I will start to move the front row behind me. And then everybody will slide up a little further. Who can say? Oh, you're doing that right now. Okay. I have a couple of announcements for you while that movement happens. I'm excited. We are excited to be able to offer our whole lives sexuality education here at the U this year. This year we're offering it for grades 7 through 9. It is open to youth not only in this congregation but in this full community. Now more than ever, I usually am very careful to not say now more than ever. I'll say something like now as much as ever. And I feel now more than ever this kind of full, science-based, values-based, honest, informative sexuality education is so important for our youth. If you know families that have youth in this range, please share this information with them. The class will offer whether they enroll or not. We don't want people to miss this opportunity to give their kids this education. And that's beginning in September, but our orientation starts next week. Registration is open now. Next week, this week, on Wednesday, we hope you'll join us for this month's Death Cafe. It is an informal but structured conversation around death. There is no agenda. It's not a group for grieving or mourning. It is for us to explore together death. It's led by Susan Stout, who is a local death doula. And so we hope that you'll join us again for this conversation. And I think it's mandated to say there will be cake. That's Wednesday at 5 p.m. here at the Meeting House. You can find more information about what's happening here in your events calendar, our events calendar, on the website and in the e-bulletin that is emailed to your inbox every Thursday. And if you have announcements that you'd like to share, please get them to the office by Tuesday of the week that you want them announced. Do we have any visitors who'd like to introduce yourselves this morning? Welcome, thank you. Welcome, I'm going to repeat for the people who are joining us on Zoom. Welcome, Sally Smith-Allen from the North Coast? Nature Coast UU in Florida. This is not your first time here, but we're happy that you are with us again.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
And pleased to be here. We are pleased to have you as well. If you are joining us as a visitor, we hope you'll sign our guest book. It's in our fellowship hall here in the Meeting House. There is a link in your chat if you're joining us on Zoom. It's a way for us to be in touch with you, to let you know what's happening here at the U, and for us maybe to learn a little bit more about you and what you're interested in. I'm going to ask us now to take this moment, we did a little of it a second ago, to greet your neighbor or someone that you haven't yet greeted this morning. In the chat, you are encouraged to do that as well. This morning, on the last Sunday of the month, which is not the last Sunday of summer, I have been assured many times this week that September is still summer, and possibly it is the best month of summer out here. But this week, we wrap up our exploration of activism by thinking about the relationship between activism and faith for us as Unitarian Universalists. We light our chalice with these words from Heidi Cottam, this faith. Let us be a faith that gathers, reaching for one another through the walls of hate others build, through the cages of ignorance and arrogance, and through the fear that burns city streets. Let us be a faith that sees a vision of a better world, more compassionate, more just, more holy, and with more love. There is a faith that binds up the broken, cauterizes battle wounds with the balm of peace, sings longer and louder than the trumpets of war. Let us be that faith too. Let us be the ones who do not tread lightly in this world, but light it up with love, who hold up the mirror of worth and dignity, who are the sanctuary others seek. But first, let us be a faith that worships together, here, this morning, in this space, in this moment. Let us be a faith. We even practiced it. It is very exciting. No. We are also a faith with patience. And persistence. Huzzah. Our first song to sing together in welcome is Come, Come, Whoever You Are. We invite you to come full-bodied and full-throated because this one is a round.
Yes, so we're going to get very ambitious this morning and do this as a 4-part round. We're going to sing it all together. I'll play it first, then we'll sing it all the way through. I will lead group 1. Carl will lead group 2. We'll figure that out in a second. Ken will lead group 3, and Kent will lead group 4. So now the groups. And we'll sing it 3 times through each. So group 1. How about Pam and Sally? Yes. And if you want, yeah, you can. And then Carl will lead the other 4, and then the group 2, and then Ken will lead. Oh, we have 2 Kens. 2 Kens. It's like the Barbie movie. There's more than one Ken.
If you're joining us online, you get to follow me since I'm up here.
And it's 188. If you're not sure, just sing something. It'll sound great, I'm sure. Okay. Once more together. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Group one. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, yet again, come. Come, yet again, of despair. Come, yet again, come. Beautiful.
Is there any more beautiful way to welcome each other into this space together? So, our first message is actually a group effort. I'm going to be joined by a few of our members and friends who are going to share some reflections with you of prominent enough Unitarian Universalist leaders on this question of faith and activism. In 2017, so remember in your mind what may have been happening in 2017. There was a lot happening in Unitarian Universalism, a lot of internal work on ourselves, and there was a lot happening in the world. And so the UU World, our magazine, asked these prominent Unitarian Universalist leaders the question, do you need to be an activist to be a Unitarian Universalist? And here are their responses. The first one will be read by Bev Krause, who I think we may see spotlighted on the screen. She's reading the words of the Reverend Marilyn Sewell. Reverend Marilyn Sewell is a writer, leader, activist, and speaker. She's Minister Emerita of the First Unitarian Church of Portland, Oregon, where she served as senior minister for 17 years before retiring. She has edited and authored more than a dozen books, including the most recent, her memoir, Raw Faith. So do you need to be an activist to be a Unitarian Universalist?
Not all UUs are inclined by personality or temperament to be activists. But do UUs need to care about social justice? Yes. That said, few UUs are people of color, and I expect even fewer are working class. So it's difficult for most of us, or for most mainline Protestants, to identify with oppressed people. We're simply too comfortable. We often behave as privileged secularists, highly educated people who prefer circles of conversation, dabbling on the margins, rather than doing the hard work of social change, which requires getting in the street, witnessing at city council meetings, negotiating with the police chief, sitting on the railroad tracks, and blocking the oil trains. We UUs are largely ignorant of our religious history, even suspicious of religion itself. Uncomfortable with the concepts of sin and repentance, we fall into judgment and project our failings upon others, who we believe are not sufficiently awakened. We have embraced the ideals of Martin Luther King Jr. without the faith that motivated, directed, and supported him.
Our next reflection is Pam and or Carl Wittenberg will share from Takia Noor Amin. Takia Noor Amin is a member of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. That is our largest Unitarian Universalist congregation, our congregation without walls that serves people all over the country and the world with a thriving prison ministry. She's also a leader of the part of the organizing collective for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. You need to be an activist in order to be a Unitarian Universalist.
I don't like this question because, of course, on the face of it, the answer is no. You don't need to be an activist in the quotidian sense of participating in protests or demonstrations to bring about social and political change. But that's not the end of the answer. The truth of the matter is that Unitarian Universalism as a faith and philosophy calls us to work toward building a sustainable, equitable context for all of us to live and thrive, and there is no getting around that. If you embrace and believe in our principles, dignity, justice, equity, and compassion, you can't sit idly by in the absence of those ideals in our society. We are supposed to uphold, as a matter of principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. How does anyone propose we get there if we don't take action to make it happen? This isn't about calling yourself an activist or an organizer or anything else. It is about being a person who lives out their principles in their home, at the job, in their congregation, and anywhere else their life might take them.
I am frankly tired of hearing fellow UUs saying, I'm not an activist, or I didn't come to this faith to be an activist, because it misses the point. This faith requires something of us in return for being our ideological home, and that requires that we get up, get out, and build the world we dream about. I don't care what anyone calls themselves, but if you aren't called to act in, on, and through our principles, maybe you shouldn't call yourself a Unitarian Universalist.
Next, we'll hear from Ken Etlinger, sharing the words of Paul Razor. Paul Razor is a theologian and law professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands and author of Reclaiming Public Witness, Liberal Religion in the Public Square.
I find it disturbing that this question has even come up. There are many ways to express and live out the principles and values we hold dear. Activism is certainly one of them, but not everyone has to take to the streets. We all have our gifts, and not everyone is suited to this kind of work, just as not everyone is suited to pastoral care, or finance, or religious education. And those who are drawn to activism or to other roles will often need times when they need to step back for quiet reflection and restoration. The last thing we need is a form of ideological or behavioral orthodoxy where those who are not called to activism feel judged or devalued. At the same time, I hope that those called to other roles would support our activists as one expression of our values, and that the activists could equally support those who undertake other equally important tasks in our communities.
Monica Zasada will read the words of Pamela Watt. Pamela Watt was minister of the Denton, Texas UU congregation when she spoke these words. She's now minister of the congregation in Wilmington, Delaware.
I believe that care for one another and our communities and concerned about areas of injustice are central to Unitarian Universalism. Activism is central to our faith. Does every UU need to be an activist, though? I am uncomfortable naming what any Unitarian Universalist should do to be Unitarian Universalist because I know that not everyone is equally capable. I want our congregations to be places where the single, low-income, hard-working parent with 3 children and overdue bills can come and feel nurtured and cared for and not feel like they aren't UU enough because they aren't hitting the streets or making phone calls or even staying on top of the issues. I want our congregations to be places where the person who is cognitively unable to empathize or to understand systems of oppression can be as UU as the person who is spending all their time leading a major justice movement or writing the next common read. More important than whether activism is a measure for our faith is whether our faith prepares and strengthens people to campaign for justice in small and big ways.
And finally, Kent Martin will share from us words from Renwa Hamami. Renwa uses they, she pronouns, is a congregational justice organizer with the UUA's organizing strategy team. When they support congregations in developing sustainable, faith-rooted justice ministries aligned with Side with Love campaigns.
Teach us, therefore, to love is tattooed on my arm just below an image of a heart broken open, flames coming through its cracks. This line from a prayer by the Jamaican Unitarian minister Egbert Ethelred Brown speaks to the despair that our troubled and puzzled world brings, and to the duty that comes with bearing witness to that pain. That duty, I believe, is the commitment to action that comes with a decision to call oneself a Unitarian Universalist. Our faith tradition was born out of the efforts of activists, people who committed their lives to bringing about social, political, and spiritual transformation. We often see activism as protests in the streets, meetings with local legislators, phone banking with community organizers, legal challenges to discriminatory laws. It is also the creation of music and art that shares truths that cannot be captured by words alone. Activism is the use of liberationist pedagogies that empower students to co-create an anti-oppressive curriculum. It is the vigil in the public square where we are reminded to #say her name each time another trans woman of color is killed. Activism is the preparation of a hot meal for the countless protesters who've been sitting outside in the cold Minnesota winter for days. So yes, I do believe that to be a Unitarian Universalist, you need to be an activist. You need to love actively in the face of a broken world.
Five leaders, 5 responses. I suspect that for each of you, there is something that resonated and something that raised an ire. So my question is for you to reflect for yourself. How would you answer this question? Do you need to be an activist to be a Unitarian Universalist? However you answer, however you respond, may your roots grow deep. May your branches spread far. May you find this world to be a wonderful place and leave it better for those who follow. We support the work of this congregation through the gifts of our time, our talent, and our treasure. Your financial contributions go to support the work inside of these walls. There will be a basket that circulates for that. And your contributions to our Helping Hand Fund support our work outside of these walls. It goes to local organizations doing good work to serve our community. A portion of that goes to the minister's discretionary fund, which helps individuals in immediate need. If you're joining us here in the meeting house, both baskets will circulate momentarily. If you're joining us online, you can use the link in your chat, and wherever you are, you can scan the QR code on your order of service as a way to give. Your contributions will be gratefully received. As we enter into this more reflective moment in our service, I invite you to take a deep breath or a shallow breath if that is what is available to you right now. But to breathe again and a third time as you feel yourself grounded and centered in your own body, in this shared space. This is our time to share our deep joy and sorrow and concern for our community and the world. If you're joining us in the meeting house and have something to share, please do come to the microphone. If you're joining us online and would like to share, we will attempt to spotlight you. That's easiest. In fact, it's only possible if you share your camera, if you allow yourself to be seen on screen, and I'll light the candle for you.
My name is Ken Dorff, and as I mentioned last time I was here, we were hoping to rent out a house for August and leave Sag Harbor in the midst of all of this. And we got an offer from a family to rent it for a whole year, which we sort of were open to, but that was quite a big deal. So we did, and now we're vagabonds for a year, and I am loving it. Stu and I took off and went to Quebec, where I'd never been, Quebec City, Montreal, where I hadn't been in 40 years. Had an amazing time in Canada. Then the Adirondacks, where we saw the Potters, and the Catskills and Saratoga Springs, et cetera, et cetera. And I just love going north. It was fabulous. We're going to do that every summer, we hope. He's in Florida now with Layla. I'll be going down at the end of September. And then we're here renting a place October, November, December, March, April, May, at least. So we're not disappearing, but we're just having a more senior vagabond life, which we're enjoying. Me more than Stuart, because I'm a natural traveler, but he's getting onto it. And Cleo is with us. So travels with Cleo. Where's that dog? Our kids are not with us.
Hi, I'm Pam. Out at the hospitality table, there are vegetables from our garden, our UU garden, and please help yourselves take some home. There's Swiss chard and red chard and big squashes and tomatoes, so please do. And always feel free to go into the garden anytime during the week and pick food.
My name is Patience, and my husband is sitting there in the back, Jerry, and we just completed almost a week of an adventure in New Hampshire. And Jerry, many of you know, has really been through it medically with heart issues, and he has proven himself to be an amazing hiker at 77 years old. He did confide in me that after the third day, he didn't think he could do another one. And you know, I also had a lot of issues that I never had before, and one was balance. And this is the other very lovely thing. We organized this hike with my son Thomas, his daughter Buzzy, who has been here, loves to come, and his wife Julie. And Tom saved me many times from falling. We were about 15 steps to the hut, which is Zealand Falls Hut, after about 3 miles of hiking. And I said, go ahead, go on, go see Julie and Buzzy, who were rabbits and were ahead of us by at least a half an hour. And he left, and I fell. Now, the reason why I fell was because, you know, I'm 76, and I have balance issues. And I had Tom with me most of the time. He's 6'5", huge, it's like Kent. And he would always put a hand out or say, Mom, plant your pole, put your foot there. Plant your pole, put your foot there. And I fell, and I have the scars to prove it, but I didn't tell anybody, just Jerry, I think last night. And so we had a wonderful time. So thank you, powers that be, for a beautiful, beautiful area that anybody can go to and commune with nature, and we did. Perfect weekend. Okay, and Jerry, I think I didn't miss anything or bore you anymore. Okay.
So my name is Kent. Our family had a tragedy over last weekend. My son's girlfriend, who we hadn't seen for a few months, but she was still in his mind, his girlfriend, who struggled with a heroin addiction for many years and met Jack, my son, in recovery, died of an overdose at her home in Mahopac over the weekend. She was found by her little sister. And our family had a difficult relationship with her because we knew she was using again, and we thought she was a bad influence on Jack. But yet we welcomed her at our dinner table, and she would stay with us once in a while. But it was, as is often the case, when you go to the funeral, you really get to know a more full picture of that person. And we got to see her family and the wonderful support system that she had around her home with friends that she had pushed away. I think they just weren't aware of the struggle that she was going through. But it was very difficult for my son. We were worried that it would move him into a relapse himself, but knock on wood, he seems to be doing okay. We had a family vacation planned that we followed through on right after the funeral in Block Island, which turned out to be a lot of fun. So that kind of tempered the whole experience for us. But very, it's so ironic. My son had been telling her for some time, "You're going to die. You keep doing this, you're going to die." And sure enough, it happened. So anyhow, that's that.
When we share here and we pray or reflect, we open our hearts to all the suffering in the world and our lives, the complicated struggles that people are experiencing. Some we know and some we won't. And sometimes there is no cheerful thing to say at the death of a young person. May the care that you create in your world be a balm for yourselves. May it be a reminder to each of us that there is more care needed in the world than we realize. And that we are more capable. We have more to give than we realize. And even amidst that sorrow, we share our joy for the ways that we are able to be with each other, with our families, and our animals. For the ways that a hand reaches out to steady us. For the ways that we reach out our hands to steady others. For the bounty that we are able to create in our own garden with our own hands to share with the world. May you carry the light of all of this love with you into the week. May it open your hearts to those around you. May it strengthen you to share with those who need it. Ashe. Let's join together in singing this next song. It's in your gray hymnal. It's number 128, For All That Is Our Life.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life, for all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good and make our own days glad.
So back to that thorny question. Do you need to be an activist to be a Unitarian Universalist? Many of us would say that we are committed to act in some way for social change, and that is key and core to our understanding of Unitarian Universalism. But what is the relationship between our faith and our activism? How does our faith call us to action or to service? Is there a theological or religious foundation for Unitarian Universalist activism? If we practiced some more traditional, more common faith, I think our answer would be more clear. Christian activists take their instruction from the words and deeds of Jesus, found in Christian scripture and gospel. They are instructed to love God and love their neighbor, to serve the least of us, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked. That is a Christian theological foundation for activism in the world. If we are Buddhist, there are as many arguments against social activism as there are for it. There are those who would tell us that there are no Buddha teachings about activism, and that it in fact distracts from self-reflection, spiritual growth, that activism in the world encourages attachment to outcomes. And there are just as many socially engaged Buddhists who will tell us something different, who will remind us of the precepts of compassion and overcoming suffering and their collective responsibility to do those things, found, if not in the words attributed to Buddha, certainly in the teachings of how one ought to live one's life as a Buddhist. There's even less in Hindu scripture about activism, but what we do get, and what brings us close to what we know, is this concept of ahimsa, nonviolence, that we know as central to our understanding of the civil rights movement made so popular by Martin Luther King Jr. Some of his activism, some of the theological grounding that pushed the civil rights movement forward was a belief in loving our neighbor and ourselves. But what also grounded and motivated King are these teachings from Gandhi, from Hinduism, found in Buddhism and Jainism, of ahimsa, of nonviolence. But an active nonviolence that sees oppression as violence and asks us, compels us, to do something for that. We might be most familiar with the Jewish understanding of social activism, because even more than Christian scripture, I think Jewish faith and action articulates this call to act in the world. The idea of tikkun olam, to heal the world, to save the world, to restore the world, sees that as the call to action of that faith. That at the beginning of time, the bowls were shattered, the light scattered, and our purpose for being here is to repair that, to repair the world to wholeness. Their activism is organized around the idea of bending the arc of justice. That quote that is so often attributed to King, the moral arc of the universe is long and bends towards justice, is actually from one of our Unitarian forefathers, Theodore Parker. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe, he says. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, it bends toward justice. But what the Jewish faith, and particularly this idea of bending the arc, does with this is to say, not only does the moral arc of the universe bend toward justice, they express their faith as action. That it is their responsibility to bend that arc. In the same way that we organize our justice around the idea of siding with love, their activism is organized, their religious activism, organized around the idea that it is their work to bend the arc of justice, bend the arc of the universe toward justice. It is an act of faith. Of all of these articulations, I think it is probably the one most similar to a Unitarian Universalist understanding, articulation of faith and action, to bend the arc of the universe towards moral justice, to act towards right and righteousness in the world, Is Unitarian Universalist an activist faith? Yes, I think all of us would say yes. The congregation that introduced me to Unitarian Universalism would end our services on Sunday by saying, "Our worship is over. Let our service begin." Our service to the world. But the question of a theological foundation is tricky and challenging. It is an uncomfortable question for Unitarian Universalists. Because what even is theology? What even is theology? And do we have a collective theology? Do you have an individual theology? It's a big word. It is quite simply the study of the nature of God, or the divine, or the universe, and our beliefs about those things. I would wager that most of us have an individual theology. Some of us can articulate it more clearly than others. We have a sense of how the world should be. We have an opinion about God or not, belief or not, action or not. And to some extent, that motivates our action in the world. But a collective Unitarian Universalist theology, and here's where I'm going to get a little bit controversial, because the idea of a collective theology butts up against the question of religion. There are many opinions, maybe not that many, but there are different opinions in this room. I am going to say affirmatively that Unitarian Universalism is a religion with a sense of collective theology. Unitarian Universalism is a religion with a sense of collective theology. So clearly, Unitarian Universalism doesn't have to be your religion. You don't have to understand it as a religion in your life. For my first few years of knowing about this thing, it wasn't my religion. I went to church every Sunday. I went to the small groups, I was on some committees, and if you asked me, I would not say that I was a Unitarian Universalist. I would say, I go to a UU church. And we are a group of people who organize ourselves, not just here on the East End, but around the country and in the world, organize ourselves around a set of religious beliefs, principles, and commitments. You're probably familiar with 7 principles: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, encouragement to spiritual growth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, the use of democratic process, the goal of world community with peace and liberty and justice for all, respect for the interdependent web. We have been encouraged to understand our faith as not only a set of principles, but maybe also now a set of values, collective values that we share. They're on our order of service, of equity and transformation, pluralism, generosity, justice, interdependence, love. We have a set of shared beliefs that call us to a set of shared commitments: community, covenant, care, accountability, respect, and action. In the early 20th century, this Unitarian Universalist understanding of action in the world and our theological call, religious call to action in the world was grounded in the social gospel. In the early 20th century, both Unitarians and Universalists were still pretty firmly grounded in their our Christian heritage. And so the social gospel called us then to serve the people on the margins. For those of us who have plenty, to serve those of us who don't. Half a century later, in the second half of the 20th century, when Unitarianism and Universalism were merging in those heady days of the 60s, in the midst of the civil rights movement, for Unitarian Universalists, this was expressed as beloved community. Beloved community, the idea that everyone ought to be cared for. The idea of love that is active, beyond just a feeling, love that is a commitment to act for justice. When Unitarian Universalists talked about beloved community in the 60s, and when they understood what grounded, what inspired action in the world, that was their theological grounding. In the 90s, when I was learning about Unitarian Universalism, it was much more humanists. For me, what grabbed me was this understanding of inherent worth and dignity, interconnectedness, that we are connected to each other and the earth itself. And those two things call us to act in the world for love and justice and equity, but not only to believe, but to act. We should care for the animals. We can believe that animals are worthy of our care. We can believe that racism and other kinds of oppression are bad, that the planet is worth saving. But Unitarian Universalism asks us to do more than just believe those things, but to actually act on those things. Increasingly, I want to add not only worth and interconnection for love and justice and equity, but care to that list. That we are called to create not just love and justice and equity, but care in the world. That seems so much more evident since the days of pandemic and shutdown and isolation. That this is a faith that calls us to be tender with each other, to be with each other, to attend to our hearts and our spirits. You don't have to call yourself a Unitarian Universalist, and you don't have to understand this as a religion to find value here. With any religion, there is a spectrum of belief. And there is a spectrum of ways that people live that belief in the world. We heard from 5 different Unitarian Universalist leaders with 5 different articulations of this connection between faith and justice. The question, though, for us, the question for you, what are your deeply held beliefs? What are your deeply held beliefs about God, about the universe, about the divine? And how do those beliefs call you to be in the world? How do your deeply held beliefs call you to be in the world? What do they call you to do in the world? And if you fancy yourself an activist, if you are one who believes that this is your faith because this is a faith of social justice, what would it be like for you to intentionally connect your activism in the world to these deeply held beliefs? This requires regular reflection on those values and beliefs. It requires disciplined inquiry into whether our actions are matching our values. That is the work of religious community. It's not the only work of religious community. There's a lot more that we do here than activism. There's a lot more that we do here than justice. But these are central to who we claim to be. There are, I could do a quick count, more than 20 of us. More than 30 of us gathered here together in person and online. So there are probably more than 40 answers to what is your relationship between faith and action. The key is not for us to have the same answer, but for each of us to have an answer. To come together in community, to hold each other accountable, to help each other reflect, to encourage each other to disciplined inquiry. Unitarian Universalism calls us into action, but first it calls us into faith, grounded in love and care for each other and for this world. It is not easy. Let's join together in singing. This last hymn together, it's number 318. We would be one. It's a call to commitment.
As one we pledge.
justice strive to make us free.
If you're joining us here in the meeting house, we invite you to stay for some light refreshments, and please do take some of the bounty from our garden home with you today and come back during the week and pick some more yourself and take it home with you then. Thank you to our greeter, Carl Wittenberg, and to our hospitality host, Ken Etlinger, and you can take your turn by helping with hospitality with the sign up out front or scanning the QR code. It's only possible when we each take a turn. If you're joining us for the first time or the 50th time and find yourself in alignment with our mission, our values, if you think this is a faith that you might be able to get down with a little bit, then we hope you will return and find a home here for yourself. These closing words are from Jim Wickerman. May our faith sustain us, our hope inspire us, and our love surround us as we go our separate ways, knowing that we will gather again in beloved community. We extinguish our flame with the words printed on your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but
not the light of truth, warmth of community, fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.